Uh, 10 good games that should have not that should not have failed. I'm actually curious about this one. Subscribe to Gamer Ranks and leave a like. They're really awesome, an awesome team. Let's check it out.
The video game industry is a sink or swim business. Some video games blow up and become massive franchises, other games completely fail. Whether it's fan reception, gamers just don't buy the game.
And we'll get like, I'll get a good idea of like some technical like hidden pearls that like can be found maybe. So.
Or the publishers themselves set ludicrously high expectations on those games. Either way, today we want to talk about 10 games that failed in some way, shape, or form that shouldn't have, that deserved more. We got 10 examples, so let's get started off with number 10 and talk 2XKO. This is a fighting game based off of the still incredibly popular League of Legends and Arcane, which it should have been an easy win for Riot Games. It's about as obvious of a spinoff as you can get. But somehow, like a mix of...
What the fuck? I didn't know. So it's a 1v1 like a fighter type, but like with fucking like League of Legends characters? Indeed, how the fuck can it fail?
Poor planning and unrealistic expectations killed this one before it ever even had a chance to find an audience. And it's a shame, because the developers working on this game were talented. They were working on the underrated Rising Tempest before getting bought out and put to work on this project. And what is here is well made. All the pieces were in place to make this a real fighting game success. But Riot just doesn't seem to understand fighting games, or like they lost faith in the project at some point, or just inexplicably expected this thing to do even insanely well right out of the gate, despite the fact that they barely even advertised it. I didn't know about this when it launched. We don't know exactly what kind of numbers it did do, because the game can only be played using Riot's game client, but just 3 weeks, yes, 3 weeks after the game's 1.0 launch in January 2026, Riot fired half of the 2XKO.
Wait, it was in January 2026? Yeah, there was like nothing
team, which probably isn't the best sign for the game's long-term future. In their follow-up statement, they pretty much say that the game failed to meet their expectations by saying, quote, overall momentum hasn't reached a level needed to support a team of this size long-term, which is really just them saying that this game is going into maintenance mode, I assume. If it was truly a finished product, then maybe losing some staff wouldn't be that big of an issue, but even at 1.0, 2XKO still feels kind of early access, but it's a good one. It's a 2v2 fighter game that had surprisingly damn good fighting game mechanics. I mean, just look at some opinions out there from fighting game experts. And
I mean, it's a League of Legends fucking fighting game, and the graphics are awesome, so past that, like, how can you fail? You have like a franchise that is so beloved, right?
You'll see that this fighting game actually had real potential. This could have been a breakout, awesome, surprise new fighting game to hit the scene. But again, it was a fighter game where it's like 2v2, where it's like you swap out, and it only had 11 characters in the roster at launch. That's small for this type of thing. Fighting game fans really, I think, expect more these days, and it's not like Riot doesn't have a massive pool of cool, popular characters to draw from. It just seems like they expected to fall ass backwards into success with this one, and the game is like full of overpriced skins. You gotta grind to unlock characters, and it's lacking in extra modes or any kind of casual content. It's like barely a finished game, but they slapped a 1.0 on it, and they barely marketed it at all. So I think this one, we could chalk it up as a self-own or an own goal, whatever you want to call it. Just 2XKO deserved more.
Let's go! Knuckle up.
Next at number 9, Sonic Racing Cross Worlds. This was a successor to All Stars Racing Transforms, and as that, it's excellent. And within fan circles, this game is seen as a real competitor to Mario Kart's racer dominance. Among fans, it's even seen as the better racer of 2025. A lot of people prefer this to Mario Kart World. Unfortunately, that positive word of mouth hasn't really translated to breakout sales success. In this game's case, it's not even that it failed terribly, it's just that it underperformed according.
I think the problem is that, like, just like I was saying about League of Legends, Mario Kart is too big of a franchise to be able to be shadowed by any other, like, there isn't a competition just because of how fucking popular Mario is and how unpopular anything else is when it comes to like this niche, right?
To Sega's metrics. The game did manage to sell more than 1 million units worldwide. It's got its fans, it's nothing to sneeze at, but clearly the corporate executives expected more. As a statement from Sega Sammy to shareholders, from Vice President Koichi Fukuzawa stated that, quote, initial performance did not meet our expectations. Man, I am so sick of this phrase after decades now. At least they're not giving up on the game, as it's continuing to get more DLC, but not everyone is crazy about some of the crossovers, like SpongeBob SquarePants or Aang from Avatar. These DLC characters are pretty expensive and don't even have voiced lines, so they barely feel like proper additions to the roster. It's a weird situation where the game is being propped up by Sonic fans, but the post-launch support isn't really doing anything to appeal to them. At least they added in some fan-favorite IDW Sonic comic characters like Tangle and Whisper, but for the most part, a lot of the game's season pass stuff kind of left fans cold. Maybe a more casual audience will be into this stuff, but it's hard to say if it'll bring enough and be enough to make Crossworlds the sales success that Sega wanted it to be, clearly. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter what happens though, because at least Crossworlds is a feature-complete game. They could end support right now, and it would still be a good game, and that's important.
One day this place will be mine again.
Marathon. Look, it's only been about 2 months since Bungie's take on the extraction shooter genre launched, so I think it's too early to call this one a full-on failure, even though a lot of people are, just because, hey, anything can happen, and, to Bungie's credit, they have made public statements saying that they've got plans to continue working on the game for years, so it's entirely possible that Marathon could turn things around and be a big success, but right now, I think things are kind of murky. This is often ignored or denied, but, this is a game that's very highly regarded by its most dedicated players. It found an audience, but it just hasn't managed to bring in more casual players, it seems. The amount of players at release wasn't disastrously low, so people predicting that this was going to be the next Concord, I think, were off, but it wasn't great either. I mean, the game at launch got bodied by Slay the Spire 2 in terms of peak player counts, and that's technically an indie game, and it probably cost a fraction of Marathon's budget. Listen, most of the time, these numbers don't always matter, but Marathon is an online multiplayer live service game, man. It lives and dies on the amount of people playing it. If those launch day numbers remained consistent, then we'd be more inclined to call Marathon a long-term success, but that isn't what's happening. Instead, the player counts have slowly but surely been kind of dropping week over week. At the time of writing, there are less than 15,000 people playing the game currently, and while those numbers may bounce back when a new season starts, it seems like a lot of players who are leaving the game are just gone for good. They got what they wanted out of it and they bounced. It's a shame because, by all accounts, Marathon is very good at what it sets out to do. I had fun with the hours I spent in it, but ultimately, it's just proven, I think, to be too niche for its own good, or the way they're marketing it. I don't know. It's easy to be a niche boutique game when you're single player or indie, but a big budget multiplayer live service game, this needs a steady flow of new players to keep the game alive. And unfortunately, the future is uncertain with this one. We don't know what the deal is. Next at number 7, Ninja Gaiden 4. This is a tough one because the game's sales have not been publicly disclosed, but the lack of any kind of update, either negative or positive, from Koei Tecmo and Team Ninja, it tells some of the story. There's still a lot of arguing among the fan base about whether the game truly flopped or not. You can look for Reddit threads and stuff like that, but at this point, I think it's pretty clear that the game did not sell as much as maybe the developers had hoped. Tecmo made an announcement when The Legend of Zelda Age of Imprisonment broke 1 million sales, but they've said nothing about Ninja Gaiden 4 other than the total sales of the franchise. And if you look at those numbers and add them up, then it seems like Ninja Gaiden 4 barely made a dent in that number. The best estimates are that the game managed to sell around 500,000 to 750,000 units between all platforms. That's what we've seen at least floating around out there. Don't take this as gospel. Now, look, either way, it's not truly an abysmal number. It's not great considering that both The original Ninja Gaiden and Ninja Gaiden 2 were able to break the 1 million mark back in the day. And in theory, the industry install base now is much larger these days, so that number would hopefully be a lot higher right now. And it's unfortunate that I guess maybe the game didn't catch on, because Ninja Gaiden 4 is a step in the right direction for the series. It feels good. It's not perfect, it's clearly made with a lower budget, but it's a great platinum game, which you don't get every single time now. And it's a good Ninja Gaiden game. It deserves more recognition and appreciation for what they've managed to accomplish, but it just didn't sell as well as it could have. Maybe Game Pass cannibalized sales too much. Maybe Ninja Gaiden 3's lingering stink kept people away. Maybe the game's relatively sudden announcement and release made people miss it. I don't know, but for whatever reason, Ninja Gaiden 4 wasn't the sales success it could have been, man. Next at number 6, one of my favorite games from 2025, Hell Is Us. This extremely dark, moody, unconventional adventure game mix was never going to be massively popular, you know? It's just intentionally off-putting and weird to be a mainstream hit. But even with that in mind, the developers seemingly got blindsided by something that nobody could have seen coming. A Hollow Knight Silksong release date, just a big drop. Hell Is Us, by pure coincidence, came out the same day as Silksong. And obviously, the anticipation behind Silksong, it meant that Hell Is Us got blown out of the water here. Oh. If you look at all-time peaks for the game, it's not good, especially when you had Silksong, you had over 500,000 people playing the game concurrently on launch day. Hell Is Us had less than 5,000. Sure, the game probably sold some on consoles as well, but most estimates say that the game sold at best around 200,000-ish copies. It seems like that's gonna be a sales failure for a game like this, and while it probably wouldn't have set the world on fire regardless, it was kind of a hardcore niche game. That unfortunate release, that surprise release of Silksong at the same time, really did not help. Keep in mind, the game's release date was locked down for a while leading up to release, while Silksong just out of the blue dropped the release date announcement only about 2 weeks before the game actually came out. So it caught everyone by surprise, especially other game developers. They couldn't move their release dates in that short of a time. And believe it or not, in an interview on the Friends Per Second podcast, it's a podcast I do with Lucy James and my friend Skill Up on YouTube. Check it out if you haven't. An interview with the creator.
Skill Up for real if you're into video game landscape, history. Like, this is a good podcast. This is like a really awesome podcast. Shout out to Skill Up. Like, this guy is awesome as well.
Creative director, he was still kind of salty about the whole thing. And who can blame him? It's not really anybody's fault. It's just some colossally bad luck. It's just a shame that the Silksong bomb happened to fall on top of one of the more interesting and more unique games of 2025. I still think you should check out Hell Is Us if you like these weird types of games.
I believe that, like, even though I agree with his opinion, if it was like really this like unique, even like niche type of game, if it had something special, it will not have failed this much, right? So I'm guessing that like it's probably more generic than, but that the reviewer actually like took a liking of it. Like, maybe not. I think that like good products in general in an open economy like this, it's are never missed completely. You know, like I really state, it's a proof that like you had a challenge, and if this was able to completely like destroy your project, maybe your project wasn't good enough, you know. But like at the same time, it's still a shame because technically like they lost a lot of money because of that objectively, right? Like the thing is, like, players are not stupid, and it's not a first day game release that like will fucking kill a franchise. All right, at least it's my opinion. Like,
Next at number 5, Steel Hunters. This is a bloodbath out there for live service games. These things are dropping like flies. Some of them absolutely deserve it, while others, I think, were owed a second chance. And Steel Hunters is one of those games that had a solid core, but there just wasn't enough meat on the bone to, I guess, retain a solid audience. This was a fun game. It felt good to play. The mechs were pretty varied and interesting to pilot. It's just that the core game mode got kind of stale pretty quickly. Like, there just wasn't enough here to latch onto. It's yet another game that just needed more mechs to pilot, more game modes, or at least a more refined and interesting version of the core game mode, and a satisfying sense of progression to help keep players on the hamster wheel. That would have helped, but that just didn't happen. The game peaked at only around 4.5 thousand concurrent players, and while there were probably a lot of other people playing the game using the War Games launcher rather than through Steam, it still points to a game that just didn't have the player base to sustain a live service game in the long run, so they shut it down. The game managed to last all of 7 months before servers closed, and because this is a live service game, it's no longer playable in any capacity, which also sucks, and that's a whole separate video, because it's like the game never even existed, which is unfortunate because I still think that there was a real potential here. The problem was that the actual game mode they came up with wasn't that much fun. That's what killed it. It wasn't trying to be some battle royale thing, like this light battle royale, and instead just let you play 5v5 team games or something, then it probably would have been a lot more popular. I mean, Mech Warrior Online is still somehow chugging along. Steel Hunters could have made it work, but it seems like they never really figured out what they had. Now number 4, Mio. Memories in Orbit. This Mobius-inspired Metroidvania had style up the wazoo and was extremely well made. It's one of the rare indie games that we would put on a similar level to a Hollow Knight. It's easily one of the best of the best in the genre. We've talked about it a lot in videos, but the
overall like art direction is really unique. I really like it.
Game being kick-ass didn't translate to sales success. According to the 2025-2026 fourth quarter revenue report from publisher Pullup, Memories in Orbit and Starship Troopers Ultimate Bug War did not achieve the commercial success expected despite excellent player feedback. So yeah, Starship Troopers is catching strays, which sucks because I dabbled in this game and I actually really liked it. I like them both, but Mio is definitely the standout, and the game you think would actually manage to do pretty well and pop off in the shadow of Silksong, but apparently not. If there's one thing about it that could potentially turn off players by the truckload, it's the game mechanic where you permanently lose health as the game progresses. This is irreversible. It cannot be undone. As you progress through Mio, your max health count will go down, and while you can unlock health upgrades to at least break even, ultimately you're gonna lose just as much max health as you gain, which is a big pill to swallow for a lot of players. It is a bold and challenging design decision that I do respect, because
this is actually like, I do respect that as well, because overall it makes the difficulty level, the difficulty scale objectively and in a way that is like really unique.
The game is balanced tightly around this, and it's not actually all that difficult compared to like Silksong. Mio is generally an easier game, but it's like time limits, People just hate them for existing, for the pressure, for pressure's sake. It doesn't matter if they're actually well crafted or not. So either way, that mechanic or not, Mio was a failure according to the publisher's words. It's unclear just how poorly the game sold, but it's another example that sometimes deserving games just don't make it. Mio is a game that deserves more attention, but ultimately, maybe it's a little too alienating to reach a wider audience. I don't know. Either way, you should still look into it and maybe play it.
Yeah, because like the game design choice is actually like really interesting, and the art direction as well.
Now down at number 3, Hyper Light Breaker. This is one of those games that should have been great, but for a multitude of reasons, it just ultimately didn't really work. The original Hyper Light Drifter was excellent, dude. It had like visually stunning pixel art, this intriguingly vague story, some solid action gameplay. It's a game that just worked. Hyper Light Breaker, the follow-up, is basically nothing like that. It's basically a hyper light game in name only. instead of making a proper follow-up to the first and most financially successful game, they took the name and used it to make it something different, you know? And it just didn't quite work. There was ambition with Hyper Light Breaker, but a co-op roguelike is just not what I think fans of Hyper Light Drifter really wanted. Maybe it was possible that the team at Heart Machine could have saved the game and taken it a completely new direction, as it was still in early access, but instead of doing that, they decided to just cut their losses. On October 9th, 2025, the developers announced that they were making layoffs at the studio and were ending development on Hyper Light Breaker. The early access game was never going to be finished. For some, it was like a breath of fresh air. They were glad the team wasn't wasting their time on this game anymore, while others, like myself, kind of couldn't help but mourn what could have been. It was unlikely, but there was at least a little potential left with Hyper Light Breaker. Their previous game, Solar Ash, wasn't quite as good as Hyper Light Drifter, but it was a solid game. It's not like this team was completely clueless about 3D games. They could have made Breaker work. It would have taken a whole total rethink of what the project was gonna be, but there was still a chance to turn things around. Or perhaps it really was just too far gone. I don't know. Either way, a follow-up to Hyper Light Drifter should have been a slam dunk, an easy win. But instead, it was an early access mess that never really made too much sense. Now down at number 2, Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. It's the elephant in the room. It sold an eye-watering 37.5 million copies, so it should come as no surprise that somebody out there wants a piece of that pie. But before Multiverses took a swing at it, nobody else was even really trying, really. Sure, there were a few tiny indie Smash-style games like Rivals of Aether or Brawlhalla, but there was never any big franchise competition. When this game launched into open beta back in 2022, it seemed like the real deal. I remember jumping into it thinking it was going to be a piece of crap, and I was surprised. Mechanically, it was solid. They had the weight of Warner Brothers' combined IPs behind it, so there were some actual heavy hitter characters to draw from the roster, and the presentation was solid. So all the pieces were in place for a long and kind of successful.
Yeah, it was a multiverse was actually like a trend online for some time, but it's true, it got completely forgotten. I actually completely forgot about this game.
Successful run as a live service game and a little bit of an alternative to a Smash Brothers, but it wasn't long before the cracks really started to show. The monetization got worse. Mechanically, the game got less interesting and overall less fun after multiple patches kind of slowed the speed of combat. The developers were responding to the wrong criticisms. It was so frustrating to see. It ultimately kind of made the game worse, but the biggest move, the developers made this baffling decision to go offline in 2023, shutting the game down for almost an entire year before, quote, relaunching it in 2024. Past the point where there was any hype left, it dissipated. Fans of the game turned on them because the developers initially promised that the game would remain online all the way up to full release, and new players just did not care anymore or know what was going on. A full year of downtime for a live service game was not a good idea. And while the game was draining players throughout the beta period, the closure, that was the real nail in the coffin, just a weird move. There was no recovering from that. The game relaunched in 2024, but the interest just wasn't there anymore, and then eventually it closed down entirely in 2025. What started off as one of the biggest potential actually good live service fighter game launches in 2022 just kind of ended with a whimper in 2025.
Get back here. What a place.
Now down at number 1, Scott Pilgrim EX. The beat-em-up genre may be big again, but that doesn't mean that the games are breaking bank in terms of sales. The big standouts are doing well, but compared to a lot of other games on this list, even the most popular modern beat-em-ups I think are probably selling less than games that are widely considered total failures. Of course, a beat-em-up is a smaller game, and you would assume a cheaper kind of game to make than a big AAA live service game or a fighting game. So these lower sales numbers can still translate to success, and it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these games sell the best on PlayStation and the Nintendo Switch. Steam is their least popular platform apparently for the most part, but even with all that said, it's still just sad how poorly Scott Pilgrim EX is performing. Now, to be fair, all we have to go on are Steam DB numbers, which don't paint the full picture of the game's total sales, but still, the original Scott Pilgrim beat-em-up essentially kickstarted the entire beat-em-up revival when it launched back in 2010 for Xbox Live Arcade, and the game is basically a follow-up to that, a triumphant return. Even if the connection doesn't matter to you personally, this is Tribute Games' next beat-em-up after the excellent TMNT Shredder's Revenge. That was right up there with Streets of Rage 4 as like one of the modern greats in the genre, so you'd think there would be more interest for this one. But for whatever reason, it just didn't happen. If you look at the numbers, like how it compared to something like TMNT Shredder's Revenge, it's absolutely nothing. That game managed to sell over 1 million copies in its first week. Scott Pilgrim EX, in comparison, has just been seemingly overlooked, and I think that's really all it comes down to. I think, honestly, most people didn't even know.
Yeah, but at the same time, Scott Pilgrim, it's like comes from a movie. Like the franchise itself, it's like it will have been better. I think it's like it will have been easier to have like a original franchise rather than Scott Pilgrim, because like Scott Pilgrim is so niche that I think it's worse, you know?
That this game exists. It felt like it had zero marketing. I didn't remember it was coming out until the week of the news show when we mentioned it. The game came and went when it was actually released, despite being just as good as other beat-em-ups. Like, it was solid. Maybe the team is cutting into their own market, releasing this and Marvel Cosmic Invasion so close to each other. I don't know. This is a beat 'em up that deserves more attention. It feels great to play. The pixel art is fantastic. The soundtrack is excellent. They brought back Anamanaguchi. All the pieces were in place for this to sell decent numbers. You'd probably have fun with it, even if you didn't care about Scott Pilgrim, but unfortunately, it just didn't really pan out. But those are 10 games that should not have failed. Again, failure is a relative term, whether it's in the fans' eyes or the corporation's side. Lots of examples here today, so let us know in the comments what you think. There are a lot of other examples we could talk about, so let us know your choices. We'll probably do a follow-up as we have done before, but clicking a like button helps us. We appreciate that. We put out videos every single
yeah, this was actually didn't sound like any interesting game. But discovered that like that there's like a fighting game, League of Legends. This is interesting. This is actually interesting. Like, this is cool. Where is it? There you go. Yeah. So thank you, Gamer Ranks. Don't forget to subscribe to them, leave a like.